Hello everybody and welcome to today's True Crime Show. We're expecting a raid any second and then I will tell you about our plans for today, which is going to be a bit different but hopefully interesting. This show, unlike the normal ones where we have multiple different stories, is going to be dedicated to one topic and we'll explore it in a few different ways, which you'll discover shortly. Yes, just waiting for the raid now. Seem quiet. Let's put the sound up. How about that, Ditch? Does that make me seem any better? Excellent, thanks very much. Excellent. How are you, Ditch? How's your day going? Great to see you early. Hello everybody, welcome in Foxy's Raiders. Thank you, Foxy, very much. This is the Robert Wilde True Crime Show, but tonight we're doing something a bit different, and I'll quickly explain what that is so people can decide whether they want to hang around or not. So this is a true crime show, but by training I'm a historian, and I've got textbooks on Amazon. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to really dig into the historical side, and we're going to do a real event, which you can call a true crime, and we're going to cover the real, genuine historical side. Yes, that's supposed to be low down, isn't it? I thought that was part of the whole. Thank you. So what we're going to be doing tonight is the Great Witch Hunt of the early modern period in Europe. The first thing to say is this will only cover Europe, which is what I know best. It will not cover the American situation. We may come to that, but we're just going to focus on Europe, and we are going to have a sort of historical look at what's going on, what happened, and all the busts and misconceptions. Then we're going to have some readings. I have some original source material in translation, so I will do some actual readings, and we also have some illustrations for this. So this is a contemporary illustration of a witch burning, which is something that there'll be a lot of in this. So first I'd like to get back to, so you've got, if anyone would like to stay and watch that, thank you very much, Ditch, for gifting a tier 1 sub to Burn the Witch. That is frighteningly on topic. They may not be happy if they come in, they may be very happy if they come in. I don't know how they're going to react. They could go either way. So hello, first time chatter, Oops Juju. Oh wow. Oh, thanks very much, Steve, for the sub bomb. We have a sub bomb, and I think we've got a hype train. Yes, we have. Thank you very much. So firstly, Steve Ford is a brilliant guitarist. Do give him a follow. However, I'm going to give a shout out to a new account that he has, if you'd like to follow, which is Steve Gaming. Which is growing as well. He is brilliant at Tomb Raider. I was sort of we were discussing this the other day. Steve was sort of saying, I could stream Tomb Raider for hours, and I sort of said, if I streamed Tomb Raider for hours, I would still be in the same room with no idea where I'm going, falling over. Then we've got Foxy, who, as you know, Foxy has been playing the new Harry Potter. No, it's not called. It's Hogwarts Legacy. They don't have the license for Harry Potter, do they? So it's Hogwarts Legacy. There is no Harry Potter. But that's good fun. Okay. So what we're going to do, the first thing I want to do is that I've never done this before on the stream, is I've read, over the years, I've read a lot of books on the witch trials, and there are a lot of books available. So the first thing I'm going to do is recommend the best book. If you're in any way interested in what I'm going to say today, this is the book to get. So I've got the 3rd edition. The 4th edition is out now, and you want the Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe by Brian Levac. It's expensive, and there's no way around that. But the third edition is great and is cheap and much cheaper now. There are other cheaper books, some of which are good, but some of which aren't, and it all gets a bit tabloid crazy. So I think if you've got any serious interest in this, that's the book to start with. The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe, Brian Levac. I'm also mentioning it because a lot of information from this is drawn from this book, and you know it's only correct to cite the source. So that's the one to go for. If you want to follow that up, the reading we're going to do later on is we're going to do some readings from the Witchcraft Source Book, 2nd edition by the same man. No worries, Foxy, no worries, Brian Levac. That's really interesting. You could buy the 1st edition, but the 2nd edition's got some really good, interesting extra stuff in. But again, these things, sadly, these academic focus books are quite expensive. But this is free unless you want to show some support, you know, Prime sub and all that. Do drop me a follow. Thank you very much, Ditch, for gifting yourself to Spanish Inquisition. They're not actually being mentioned at all by name, but you know, we'll get there. Excellent. So I have a number of images to switch through, and the question is, how fast do I go through these? So I think we'll stick with that one for now, and then we'll move on. Right, I do have to apologise. The camera will be moving around depending on what's in the image. Obviously, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. I certainly didn't, Ditch. I certainly didn't. These things weren't. These woodcuts and other drawings weren't done to easily fit a camera on, so I will be moving around the screen as we move down. Right, so let's have a bit of a thing on what the hell I'm talking about. Well, I think, if I'm being honest, that everybody pretty much knows that sort of 1400 to 1800 there was what we call the early modern witch hunts. You know, everyone's got this image of a certain sort of person with a certain hat going around burning people. Do you have the stats on how many witches were actually burned? Yes, I do. Yes, Ditch, I have that information, and that is a key part of what we're going to discuss. We're going to actually get down to what really happened, as opposed to many of the myths and legends. So let's get into an introduction so you can tell what I'm talking about. So between 1415 1800, the early modern period, Europe, we're going to be covering Europe as a whole, experienced a massive witch hunt. Thousands of men and women, in many places more women, were accused of witchcraft, tried, and some were executed. We'll get to how many soon. Often by a method which revolts the contemporary burning. However, many people were strangled before they were burned. England generally didn't burn, lots of regional variation. Now, do we know why it started? We indeed get into that as well, Ditch. Ditch, do not worry, Ditch. This is a full history lesson, man. Don't worry. We are going for it today. So the first thing I want to discuss in terms of any history is regional variation. The wider the geographical spread in anything in history, the more different regions had different variations. So when I say the European witch hunts, there were massive variations. Some locations had nothing. Some periods had nothing, but in some places they would flame into almost chaos and then reduce again. So over this period, you're looking at essentially lights on a map going on and off at various times. It's not one thing; it's all variation. So Ditch says he's comfy. He has Jaffa cakes. Let's go. Let's go indeed. Now I don't actually eat on these streams, in case I get excited and choke on a crumb. But yeah, I could go for some Jaffa cakes right now. So in general, different regions had slightly different reasons for trying witches, but some general threads can be discerned. So the early modern witch hunt evolved as it was in the 15th century. It dropped off for a few decades from 1520 to 60, rapidly expanded to the greatest extent between 1560 and 1630, and then fell away after this continually into the 18th century. You will be pleased to know that that is basically all we're going to do with dates. This is not a list of dates. This is how I like to present history, and that is essentially the date section. We will now move on to more interesting topics. So despite the variations, this is considered one large event, when the nature of it, the motives of it, is considered a great European witch hunt. Now the second thing I always have to mention during any sort of historical content is there is no single cause. People always want to find a single cause for historical events, and people have blamed the Reformation, anti-paganism, misogyny. None of these stand alone. Thank you very much, Karen, for gifting the gift sub to Zane. I assume that's not Zane from One Direction, who's the only Zane I know. Yeah, Ditch is coming in with, it was started to deflect attention from the disenfranchised by redirecting the anger against the weird and unusual. Well, compare that to what we're going to get to. Hi there, Karen. Yeah, so there's no one cause. What I'm hoping to present to you today is a clockwork of how this all came together and how it happened. Historians like Lavaco I've mentioned, and also Thurston, whose work is good, don't like the older term witch craze. Craze to them implies a flight into unreason. And this is one of the big misconceptions about the witch trials. The witch trials were not a period of insane vigilante actions. It was not the work of rogue travelling witch hunting madmen. They had a massive judicial underpinning. The witch hunts is the story of when your own government, your own legal system, and your own entire society turns against you, against a marginalised group. This was not random, and it was not the actions of a few crazed people. It was something far more insidious that bears comparison with many other historical events going forward, and I will explain why and what I'm talking about in a minute. But the thing to stress is this is when the legal system turns against you. So Ditch asked for the numbers. Now the numbers of those tried. At what point was Vincent Price involved? The 50s and 60s, the 1950s and 60s. Peter Cushing, all of them, Ditch, they all did some bangs. So the number of those tried and those executed has been greatly exaggerated for effect. Witch hunters like to exaggerate what they did. Modern writers like to exaggerate what happened to push political myths. So, while reconstruction of the exact numbers is tricky, as quite a lot of trial records have been lost, there's been an awful lot of war in these places since. Brian Lavac has built off all the surviving documents and built in a statistical deduction, and he believes he has the most accurate figures for the early modern witch hunt, and everything seems legit. So this is what I'm going to give you. So it is believed that for the whole period in Europe, there were, rounding, 90,000 trials. Half of those occurred in the German part of the Holy Roman Empire, and the rest were in the rest of Europe. The number of men and women executed was half, which means the number of people killed was 45,000. So this is lower than the hysteria has claimed, but is no less indicative of a culture of suspicion, finger pointing, and casual slander. These 45,000 were not spread out evenly over the period. There were different clumps in different areas at different times. However, the people of early modern Europe would not have recognised such a low figure. They frequently believed that they were surrounded by witches, that they were witches' area. Ditch says he's heard there were very few actual burnings. So a lot of people were hung. A lot of people were strangled to death before the burnings. So of that 45,000, it's not all being burned. No. So the burning figure is lower. Right, so what do I mean when I say a witch? Well, in the period of the witch hunt, the witch of the hunt and the trials was believed to be an evil force. They were believed to practice black negative magic, which could harm people and crops, curse and corrupt. It was a low magic which needed no alchemical training. It was spread orally and was simple. This corresponded with our belief in other magics, such as alchemy, healing, white magics. And practitioners associated with those were sometimes left alone by the trials. Sometimes people ignored this distinction and hoovered them up. But something here had changed. The witches of this era were linked more than ever before explicitly to the devil as servants and partners. Belief in low and black magic had been around for centuries, but there had never been a vast witch hunt. It was theological developments of the new millennium which began to attribute all magic to pacts with Satan, which made all witches and magic users heretics. This change from simple magic to demonic assistant altered how people treated and viewed the accused. So in the 15th century, a new focus on stamping out heresy of witches emerged. Witchcraft had turned in the centuries before into devil worship. Now, obviously, the exact as opposed to pagans. Yeah, we'll get to the pagan situation in a minute. The exact focus on harmful magics or devil worship varied by time and region. Of course, I need to keep stressing that. And so it's important to stress that only a very, very, very tiny percentage practiced black magic. Right? Some thought they did, and only a slightly larger amount thought they were practicing white magic. These had always existed. Having said that, there is no evidence, despite what people claim, that there existed a countrywide or continental-wide actual satanic religion or actual pagan religion that the witch trials now wiped out. That is a modern later invention. There were always individuals or small groups practicing their own take, but that's very different. It was Ditch, and we'll get to the Reformation in a bit. The majority of those tried weren't even the witches that were... No, keep asking questions, that's fine, because you may come up with something I've not planned, but if I know it's coming up, I'll be able to tell you. So keep sort of throwing it in, because if I've not thought of what to put in, it just so happens that I'm just letting you know. I'm not ignoring you. It's coming, because that is an important point. And people have well, I'll get to it rather than leap into it now. But yeah, we're going to be doing that. So the majority of those tried weren't people who thought they were witches. own. So I mean, and if it sounds weird to say, but there were definitely, you do have to remember, there were a few people, a very few people, who did actually think they were doing what they were accused of. Pretty much everyone wasn't, but you do have to, account for that. So belief in witches. Other things had changed. We had belief in witches for centuries, and then all of a sudden we get a vast continental-wide witch hunt. So what changed? So we've already seen the theological change, that witches went from essentially pagan to devil worshippers. What else changed? Is it true that wives that couldn't bear children could be accused and tried as a witch? I think it's safe to say, Ditch, that pretty much anything could be accused and you could be tried as a witch. It was one of the reasons it was so easy to accuse people was because, firstly, you didn't actually need, because there was no proof. There were no real, most of these people weren't witches. People were being accused and then tortured to confess, and anything could be a trigger. Yes, we're going to get to were many men. In fact, up to a quarter of all those numbers I told you earlier were men. Yeah, don't worry. So, what happened? Illiterate peasants and illiterate workers and peasants are described to witch practices as harmful magic which could damage them and their crops for centuries, but they didn't really see that there was a devil worshipper wandering about. Their belief in magic killing animals or damaging their crops had been the norm for centuries. There had been lynchings, there had been bad things, but there had not been a massive witch hunt. So what changed? What started and sustained the early modern witch hunt was a newly acquired belief of the elites. Elaborate treatises anticipating images of demonic pacts, satanic Sabbath, and widespread devil worship tended to be held by educated elite groups like theologians, judges, and other rulers and elites who had access to material. And speaking of images, do keep reminding me I've got a lot of photos. This is a witch's Sabbath. That black goat is the devil. You will notice there are 3 women and a man, which is which is the correct proportion. Don't think they knew that, but again, this scene's built a bit weirdly because it's very difficult to supersize this picture anymore without cutting off what essentially is going on. So a view developed out of changes in the later medieval period. One of these was theological. The devil went from being a hateful antichrist, but bad, to a direct opponent to God, even worse. So you essentially went from the 7 deadly sins to the 10 commandments, to the first commandment being aimed at the devil. There was a belief that you could make a pact with Satan and gain magical powers. So something else happened. The rise of scholastic thinking allowed all magic to be linked to the devil. So essentially what you had is you had a situation where there had been sort of pagan magics which sort of been allowed to run on in rural areas, and people started to go, no, that's not sort of pagan magics, this is all the devil and we must get the devil, and that sort of took over. More than that, although there wasn't a pan-European satanic organisation, people began to believe there was a pan-European satanic organisation. Devil worship became more of an existential threat in the mind of the elites. So the heretics and mages of the medieval period, there'd always been heretics in the church, it got rid of them. There'd always been people, but through the 12th and 13th century, it evolved into this fantasy which fueled the modern hunts. Furthermore, because people now thought there was this vast satanic conspiracy, it was no longer enough to just kill the weird person that sold a few dodgy potions. You had to find the whole group, because there was now the concept of the Sabbath. There were now always groups of witches. So people looked to spread trials. Witch hunts got larger and larger. Men had dominated the role of mages during the medieval era, but now women were accepted as magic users too. This new view of witchcraft coalesced by 1450 to start the hunts, but it would develop during the hunts. So, for instance, you may have heard that people would look to see if there was the mark on the body from the devil. That was from the 16th century. It was 100 years later. Male demons were considered for the first time that they could mate with men, and of course, as the elites became interested in this, the descriptions of Sabbath and practices grew more elaborate and titillating to the audience. They were horrified, but they wanted to know more and sort of enjoy the naughty books. So once this view formed, it was disseminated amongst the elites of Europe. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I've heard of the Malleus Maleficarum, the most famous book about what witches got up to, which was a manual about witches and witch hunting and stuff. That was not that important. By far, the most important way of making people believe that there were witches and then driving people to attack them was actually through trial records and judges' writings. There was a sense, there was a sense of legitimacy. This judge held a trial. Here's the account. I'm a serious judge. I've got to pay attention to this. Also, we had printing. These trial records and these accounts could be, relatively speaking, mass-produced and spread around far, far quicker. So you can see how being able to print one trial into lots of other things would then lead to more trials and more trials, and how things could sort of exponentially expand. Quotes from trials were always more important in the witch hunts than quoting the Malleus Maleficarum's weird sexual fantasies. Judges passed on to information to judges. Some of these people acted because they had a fear of Satan. Others acted because they wanted to be fashionable. Others acted to consolidate their own power. So, you had the elites all ready to prosecute, but the peasants were needed to help, because they're the ones that had to make the reports. It's possible that reading trial charges orally, such as preaching, helped introduce belief to them. So, we'll come back to that in a second. We're going to do now who were the witches. So, a majority of witches were women, but there was nothing in the legal or theoretical system to stop a man being considered one. And Levac has identified a fifth to a full quarter of all those who suffered in the hunts as men. The female-only witch is a stereotype. Women were in the majority because there was a centuries-old tradition of wise women, the cunning folk who practiced herbal cures and advice. They suddenly became vulnerable because now, more than ever, they were associated with Satan. Women were also vulnerable because they were in positions where people could pass on quite quickly. They were midwives and child carers. This was an era of vast infant mortality. If a man died in battle, nobody went, oh, that was a witch. If you were a midwife and a child sadly died after a difficult birth, grieving and angry parents could very easily turn around and accuse you. You were very vulnerable. Levac believes that witches were generally older and unmarried men and women. Thurston concludes differently, saying that married people were more likely. But I also should point out that children could be accused, as the hunts when some of the hunts, but not all, exploded into complete chaos. People down the social and economic ladder were more vulnerable, and there was a link between economic witch unrest and rising trials. That said, some trials, the very wealthy got accused and were killed, and we will have an account from one of those later, I think, if we're all enjoying this. But having said all of that, many witches, many of the accused, were simply people because they couldn't afford court representation. Oh no, nothing like that. No. So many witches were simply people who did not get on with their community. If your village thought you were rude, or if they thought you'd erred morally, that opened doors to get rid of you. You can just about say that the most likely person to be accused for witchcraft was an older, grouchy, widowed woman earning a living from child-related work, but the net and the variation was very wide. So, witch hunts and the law. Few witch executions happened as a result of a vigilante mob. The process may have involved gruesome torture and execution, but it was mostly a legal process which happened in accordance with the laws. The early modern witch trial was a judicial phenomenon of crime and punishment. Why? Again, something changed which allowed this to happen that wasn't there before. The legal system developed in a way that made it exceptionally vulnerable for several centuries to this sort of abuse. So first, the witch trials moved from ecclesiastical courts, which were mostly concerned with spiritual matters, to the secular courts. Here, two things happened. First of all, the kind of legal system changed. Generally speaking, the old legal system in Europe was the accusatorial system. This was where a victim came to the courts and initiated the process. This was not very good at achieving successful prosecutions. You needed a victim to come forward. You needed mostly an actual crime. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the legal system changed to what is called the inquisitorial method. This allowed a court to go out and find the crimes and the victims and the guilty, a judge to initiate and push forward a trial, get humans to investigate, assess and judge. Courts could now go looking for trouble. This process, mostly on Amazon Prime, says Steve, this process needed witnesses, written statements, private interviews. This produced a profession and larger legal profession, which it changed over time into what we have now. So this, as ever, there was great regional variation, but this essentially made witchcraft cases easier to prosecute. You didn't need victims, just a rumour that there was some in the area, and then you could go find your victims. But something else changed. The thing that really made the people of Europe vulnerable, because for a period of time, torture was brought back. There were almost no real witches or real victims. Yes, King Cobra, you could charge the FedEx driver for not delivering it. Let's not tell certain large former bookshops about that. So torture was brought back in the 13th century. So obviously the system called for witnesses. There weren't any in witchcraft, so confessions became important. And if you were using torture, you could get as many confessions of anything you wanted. Torture produces false testimonies. It is entirely useless in a fair legal system. But because it was reintroduced, it did not produce a fair legal system. There were rules to produce accurate tortures, and of course, as ever, they were abused. Witches, the devil, people thought these are so bad, rules don't apply. So they used sleep deprivation, was one of the most effective tortures in producing questionable results for minimal moral quibbles. They're both the same ditch. Secular courts, affected by all the faults and corruption of these, essentially, at the start of this period, gained the power to go out and find people they thought were witches, and then torture people into admitting they were witches, all under the full guise of the law. Many new secular laws were brought in specifically to help people target witches. The result was a huge increase in trials. You had a faulty legal system with a giant hole in it that allowed this to happen that wasn't there before and was going to be plugged. This people would pay attention that this was wrong, and they would put things in place which would stop that system and begin to turn it into what we recognise today. But there is a direct line from this period to what we have now in its development. So there was a huge increase in trials. Some states used witch laws to strengthen themselves. Some acted to try and take more power over local courts and all this sort of thing. Most of the cases, like you heard me say, happened in the decentralised lands of the Holy Roman Empire. Decentralisation was vital in this. While witchcraft was spread to a greater or lesser extent across Europe, the smaller the state, the more power that was in fewer hands, the more likely an explosive witch hunt was. Larger centralised states tended to react quicker to stopping the chaos of the witch hunt and restoring continuity. The Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of hundreds of tiny states, was prime ground for judges and elites to run amok, because there was very little to stop them and very little sense of the balance and continuity needed to maintain a large state. So, did you mention the Reformation? So the witch hunt took place in both the Catholic and Protestant lands, and the Reformation and Counter-Reformation certainly helped the hunt develop. Historians have decided it was not a single root cause, as has been said. Both Protestants and Catholics had essentially the same view of the devil and demons. Increased religious conflict of the age did increase people's fears the devil was real, but this fear was applied to everyone. All sides wanted to strike at the devil. Witches were an easier way to strike at the devil and solve your existential panic than necessarily going and finding some Protestants or some Catholics. There were a huge cloud of moral inadequacy stemming from the religious turmoil, which drove revenge accusations. Both branches tried to reform. They both wished to remove magic amongst themselves and others. Witches again became a target. As the Reformation continued, states, secular or quasi-religious under prince bishops, became the new guardians of morality with laws to punish. What is certain is that the areas of greater religious Reformation conflict saw the more trials than peaceful areas. Not more likely. There's so many other factors. No. You were more likely to be burned as a Catholic in a Protestant. You're more likely to fall foul for. If you look at England, England did actually burn religious opponents, sort of opponents. No offence. Whereas it didn't tend to burn witches. Very rarely. England generally didn't burn witches, it hanged them. Whereas we did burn quite a lot of people because of their religion. So society. Now, this is going to be the oddest part of what I'm going to say, because the witch hunts have been identified for what role they played in society. Now, this sounds odd. Why am I saying a role in society? Well, everything happens for a reason. At the extreme of true crime, those reasons are often the development of psychopathic illnesses. When a large group of people do something, there's a reason. We may not agree with it, but we must understand it. If society engaged in a witch hunt, there must be a reason. And that reason is it was being used to take conflicts that we may have, often now or then, between people, a step forward. It allowed them to rationalise aspects of their life that they didn't understand or couldn't properly control by giving them an easy scapegoat. So the early modern era was a time of immense change, not admittedly as much as the Industrial Revolution, but there was a rise in population, larger settlements, new ideas of family, agricultural developments. There was tension between groups of people all the way around before you even got to the vast psychic pain of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. and that was pushed out as an outlet into the witch trials, which could occur because these systems had changed to allow it. The other thing is, of course, humanity is born with an inbuilt fear of things that is different to it. We'll get to that in a second bit. And that fear turns into hate and racism and homophobia and xenophobia. And this is just one more thing people could quite easily use to express that part of humanity. Ditches could ergot have been a factor. Now, for those of you that don't know, that is essentially old bread develops slightly hallucinogenic properties. There have definitely been discussions about ergot. It is not I mean, the theme of this is it is not the sole answer, but you can identify some instances where it did have an effect. Yes, where people were reporting things they saw as hallucinogenic, but it is by far not the majority reason. Okay, so the witch hunts themselves. Hang on, I've got to change the. Remind me to do that. We're 50 minutes in and I'm running out of content, and I've got quite a few more photos. So a witch hunt needed people who believed in the threat of witches, which was elites pushing this onto peasants, and a legal system that allowed this to happen. We did have this. The inquisitorial system that used torture. You also needed the fear, whether from sermons, folk belief, economic, religious, political upheaval, to disturb people. So, a bad harvest, an unforeseen death, religious doubts, a child born in childbirth. The opportunities to trigger a witch hunt were endless. Dead children, dead animals, impotence, illness, antisocial behaviour, the chance to love jealousy, the chance to do one over on your business partner, mental illness, senility. You know, the opportunities to involve people in this were everywhere. So again, you've got this situation, and then you've got, in no sense, any rare trigger. You know, it was all over the place. So geography was important. Again, I keep stressing geography. It all varied. England had relatively little torture compared to everywhere else, had relatively little of the new ideology, and with the exception of Matthew Hopkins at the end of the Civil War, relatively few witch trials, and again, no burnings. So, with what happened, a witch would be identified by the authorities for trial. Again, let's say, we've heard there's a rumour there's a witch. Somebody would be like, oh yeah, my baby passed away, my wife died in childbirth, that woman's a witch. Most witch hunts tried the initial victim, and that was it. Only a small percentage blew up into the mass executions and hysteria. Yes, Ditch. The English Civil War had a small effect. There was nothing comparable to Europe. So the 30 Years' War and the wars of the Reformation in Europe, actually, those saw less trials than elsewhere. People were obviously busy. In England, the English Civil War produced the chaos that produced Matthew Hopkins, who was the leading English witch hunter, and perhaps what everybody in England imagines when they think of witches. Once again, I'll just stress that this does not include America, the colonies and all of that. We may do that if there's interest in another time. So only as it was not a noticeably larger thing, no. So insane judges and hunters were far from the norm. Again, having just mentioned Matthew Hopkins, he was not the normal. But you had your witch. You would then torture your witch. They would confess because they were being tortured. That's not. If you deny the charges, you would be tortured, and your pain-fueled fantasies would come out. If you knew you were going to die anyway, which you were, you may make a confession up yourself to spare you the torture, so you would just be executed. The elaborate, fantastic accounts of witches' sabbaths and dancing with the devil frequently came from the threat or the use of torture, people trying to outdo themselves to get it to stop. And then, of course, you would be asked to name the others. And you would name the others because you were being brutally tortured. And they would be arrested, and things could spread, as you can imagine. The sheer number of those tried meant some people I'm not going to say, is that a brutal thing? You were picking people. You were often picking people up on the fringes of society who were struggling with various issues, which meant trying to be fair about this, which meant perhaps being pushed easily into it. We have had dreams cited as sources, not many, and yes. There is still the accidental impact of hallucinogens. Oddly, there are still a few cases where people happily gave confessions without any threat of torture and without any apparent sanity, who thought they genuinely had made a pact with the devil. Didn't work, obviously. You may be wondering, well, if things changed one way, how did this end? Over the course of the 18th century, the witch hunt ended. It wasn't over in one night, but slowly trials decreased in number, convictions fell, and laws were changed so witchcraft wasn't a crime. This process varied over Europe, but by 1800 it was over. The Dutch ended things early, the Poles late. Legal changes continued. A more accurate system emerges thanks to the criticisms of some judges and lawyers, which had always been present during the hunts, and who now came to dominate. Torture was limited and vanished for centuries until it was brought back in recent times. There was a call for better evidence. Central government took greater control of local systems. Mass hunts and executions scared people into reform. The mindset also began to change. People didn't stop believing in witches, but enough of the elites, enough of the people in charge, grew ever more into a new belief that they should challenge the world through scientific discovery. They found natural reasons for what was once witchcraft. Medicine evolved, the elites changed, the hunts were essentially beheaded. The wars of religion and the fight for primacy amongst Christian factions settled down and tailored off. The world became less apocalyptic, less a battle of good and evil. Tolerance began to expand, things began to settle. Other poisonous beliefs like nationalism took over. Oh, good, thanks, Ditch, yep. So this is an English hanging. I don't know why I said that so boldly as if it was a good thing, but this is an illustration of a hanging in England. Got a bit excited then because I got to change the picture. Where did we get to? Laws on witchcraft once the laws on witchcraft were actually removed, many people had mostly stopped using them. So again, if you want to follow that up, the major source is The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe, Brian Levac. 4th edition is out now. I've got a 3rd edition. You can probably pick 3rd edition up cheaper, I would assume. Also good is Robert Thurston's The Witch Hunts. It was originally published as Witch Wiki Mother Goose, but now has a revised edition. He's easier to read than Levac. Levac isn't hard, but he's easier to read, and they do differ. If you have a serious thing, start with both and compare and contrast. Ditch has the rather cynical view the elites got bored with declaring witches and moved on to science. I'm not sure bored is necessarily the word, but you're not wrong. An obsession with the world being an apocalyptic religious battle moved into understanding the world through a very different lens. Yes, the scientific lens, essentially. But again, massive variation. Not one cause, a clockwork watch of different interactions. So that's the I want to say lecture. That's the lecture done. Right. So as I decide what to do next, I will let you tell me what we're thinking. Okay, what are we thinking about that? So that was an experiment. Okay, I've never done anything that historical on this show. Is anyone still here? Let me have a look. Oh, there are still viewers. So are we feeling alright about that? Was that interesting? I do need the feedback. Does Dante's Inferno fold into this at all? I have no idea, to be honest. I don't know about that one. Yeah. So there's a couple of other things we can do if people are up for it. Oh, hello, Polly. Speaking of witches, my familiar has just meowed. You're my familiar for the purposes of this. Yes, yes. You're my familiar for the purposes of this, Polly. But you are, of course, my boss. Yes, I heard that, yes. So, what could we do? I think we'll have a little scroll. So the next 5 images are part of a sequence. They are a series of woodcuts that illustrate the pact with the devil. So I think we'll go through them in order, and I will talk us through, and then we'll see if anyone wants to continue with some readings. So what do we have first? So here we have witches pay homage to the devil. The devil on the left, often portrayed as a goat. You will note that the witches are both genders, and they have come to lose their souls. So what happens next? Well, I'm not sure what the terms are service. Were there trials in areas that may have been more pagan strongholds? Pagan strongholds not really something that the early modern period, I'd have said, had. I feel that's not really sure what you'd call a pagan stronghold in like the 1600s. Areas. Oh, well, that's an interesting concept. Yes. So Ditch is describing areas of Wales, Scottish Highlands, and maybe bits of Ireland as pagan strongholds. Interesting way of viewing it. Again, you have named all parts of the British Isles, which had proportionately fewer. So it had firstly, there is nothing about the Druids left in by this period. The idea that there is some continuity with the Druids is complete nonsense. So forget that. In terms of what you're saying, there were less. So every area you've mentioned is in the British Isles. The British Isles had less permeation of the elites with witchcraft thinking, and it had less trials. It had less executions. It was actually a very low, dangerous area. So in a sense, there were, but what you've named is a lower area than, say, central Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, which was crammed to the rafters with Christian religious conflict. So I suppose what I'm saying is there were fewer. I think what I'm saying is there were fewer in what you've identified. Yes. Oh, yes. Don't get me wrong. I could easily do another show outside Europe, and this show is gauging the interest in all of these things. Don't worry about that. So this is the next one. I'm not sure the terms of service, but this is the witch kissing the devil's buttocks. Sorry, Twitch. Which was a way to pledge allegiance. Again, you'll notice both genders. This time it's at night. So they've got torches. This thing was done at night. And you will notice that the devil is some sort of weird winged goat, lizard, dragon thing. It's worth pointing out that there's about 8. If you've never seen many medieval manuscripts, you may think that they were these strict, ornate, really seriously carved out things. They're not. There's the things in the marginalia, the things in the margins, the headings of the key letters. There's some brilliant, absolutely insane stuff that people, I don't know. Ditch Boy mentioned ergot. Yeah. This is where that comes in. People were just illustrating these books completely tripping balls. It's amazing. It doesn't really fit with this, but I don't think there's any way I can crowbar bizarre marginalia into a true crime show like I've crowbarred witches. But Polly has just got the zoomies and is charging around like she's robbing the place. Maybe she is robbing the place, and that will be next week's show. So this is The Devil Gives the Witch His Mark. Again, this was mostly a 16th century introduction. Now, it's funny you mention that, Ditch. I have one of the most well-documented, I'm not going to say, case is the wrong word, one of the most well-documented accusations of vampirism for the next spooky stream. It's a really good one. So we've got that coming out one day. Halloween. Apparently it's 3 months to Halloween, which is great. Apart from the fact I quite like a summer. I quite like a long summer. So if we could have that before Halloween, no offence. But so what do you do once you've been given your mark? This is witches trampling the cross. Only I'm being an idiot and I've actually managed to cut the cross off. Well, I guess I can't get in any trouble for being offensive, but they're stamping on a cross to prove their allegiance to the devil. You try and set these things up, but then, Kincaid says, how everyone, they've probably trampled them. Yeah. And then finally, the devil rebaptizes everybody in his own, as witches in his own belief. Again, both genders, the devil being a bit weird. Okay. So that's the image section. Well, now go. I feel like we'll leave that up. No, that's actually quite a point. We'll leave that up for a moment. Thank you for Turkish Beer for the follow. Very kind of you. Sorry it's taken me half an hour to notice that. Very nice indeed. Normally I say everything I discuss on this show will be in my Dishboy says, isn't hell associated with fire and as such a curious way to kill witches? It's also associated with purging. Firstly, the witch is going to hell anyway. You're not saved. And it's about it's a sense of the purging of, of a fire, rather than this is something that they'll be immune to. But again, a lot of people were hung, a lot of people were strangled before being burned. So we've done an hour and 10 minutes. Got a few people in. Do we want a reading? Or are we happy? I mean, I don't know how this has gone down. Are we happy? There. It's ironic you would say that, Ditch, because Ditch said if anyone was actually a witch, it's more likely they'd be fireproof. Well, it's funny because people sort of thought that one way to test for witches was to essentially throw women in water, and if you floated, you were a witch, because for some reason they thought witches floated. If you drowned, you were innocent, which is a bit of a shame, as you were dead, but at least you weren't in hell. Not necessarily modern things. A bit more difficult to set someone on fire just to see if they're a witch. Even I know this was crazy, but even that was too much. So they're saying Solomon Kane is not a documentary. No, Solomon Kane is not a documentary, but it is a highly underrated pulp movie that I would urge anyone that likes sort of pulp movies to see. It's good fun. It's very good fun. But it's the sort of thing, in the context of this lecture, that would be produced halfway through being tortured while on ergot. Just tie it all in. Alright, well, I hope you've enjoyed our look at witches and witchcraft. In terms of the Great Witch Hunt, this is a bit of a diversion. You can let me know by DMs, emails in the Discord whether this is something you want more of, whether you're happy with, or whether we just stick to more traditional true crime. I have certainly enjoyed doing it. It's good to get the old historical hat on again, go through some real history, and tackle some myths, get a few photos up and stuff. So thanks very much. Thank you, Ditch, for your support. It's been great to chat with you as we've gone on this journey. I will assess whether this is a good idea or not. Might not be, and then we'll move on. But I hope everyone has been sufficiently interested. Right, I had better sort out a raid. Let's see. No, that's me. I don't want to raid me. Let's see who's on. Now, as you know, we started off this series by raiding animal-based streams, and I've sort of brought up a list of crafty streams we could go to. So I feel we're going to raid a crafter who is crafting away. They've only got 4 viewers. They aren't an affiliate, so make their day and give them a follow if you're so inclined. And we shall go and see. They are making Pokemon display boxes. Those of you who know me, our fun journey, pop a poll. Yeah, okay. If everyone wants to put up with me, I'm talking for where's the poll? Oh yeah. I would also like to apologise for the lack of Kitty. She's not been in tonight. Who knows why? There's a guy on there. There's a guy on Twitch. Here we go. The guy on Twitch that has a you can if you give him bits, he will feed his cat. which is a brilliant and engaging method. The trouble is my cat is not here. So we're like, oh, here's some bits. And I'm like, thanks. Yeah, Ditch says, I'm starting to believe Polly is fictional. If you hadn't met her for the vet, you would have every right to suspect that Polly is fictional. You probably are starting to think that I left Polly at the vet. But other people have seen her. It's because you tend to come around when she's flat out asleep in the sun. I will set the raid up and we will, yeah. So we've got 2 votes for more historical crime so far. Interesting. Thanks, Foxy. Oh, thanks, Steve. Oh, thanks. Oh, yeah, I'm glad you like the pics. Yeah, that's one advantage of doing something set centuries ago, is that some of the artwork is out of copyright and you can sort of use it. I will be introducing more modern photography, not gory. Strict rule: no visual gore. Right, so everyone, that's fine. That's the rule. That stays. But maybe some photos of the accused. Again, the priority is to not get booted off YouTube. So we work carefully on putting those in. And having worked for some companies where somebody has inadvertently used a photograph and then had somebody go, pays $20,000. I'm a bit cautious on that. All right then, so everyone. So the poll has said yes, a bit more historical crime. So we shall see. Anyway, here is the raid command. We will be raiding Vivilaine Rousson. Oh, that did not do that. Alright everybody, have a good time. Thanks for being in here. And I shall see you soon.